I just love listening to the Carrier Update. You learn something new every day, I swear. Now, we do have Sal Mercogliano with us. He is the Associate Professor of History at Campbell University. Sal, how are you doing this morning?
Hey, how about yourself?
I'm pretty good. I'm just jumping in for the last hour of this show that we have. So we're getting into trouble at the American ports. We're seeing a lot of it, of course. Let's get into a bit of the congestion issue that we're seeing.
Well, I mean, the best example of that right now is the port of Los Angeles. Had a great interview yesterday. The port envoy, General Steve Lyons, did the monthly report with Gene Soroka there in LA, and they had a great talk about situation facing them. But I'll give you the statistic that's probably the most scary one right now, is that the port of LA has over 70,000 boxes sitting on the terminal waiting to get offloaded. 32,000 of them are rail boxes, and that is a 611% jump in the number of rail boxes waiting to get off. So the intersection between the ports and the rail are a critical factor right now, especially on the West Coast.
Oh, they certainly are, Sal. And welcome to the show, my friend. How is this backup on the rail boxes specifically occurring? Is it? I mean, I wrote about in the Time Suck-O-meter earlier this week how the rail yards in Pittsburgh blew up to 405 minutes, right? I mean, like 65% increase because, I mean, chassis are a difficult thing. Is this backing up all the way to the ports?
It is. And what we're seeing there is especially the boxes over 9 days, and they're just not able to get a movement. What the interesting thing is, again, when you look at the ports right now, ships are moving in and out. We're not having a problem with ships moving out. We got about 20 something vessels waiting off of LA and Long Beach. Some vessels, you had a report from Hauppauge, for example, that they're able to get their ships in and out without a problem. But what we're just seeing right now is the congestion going in the yard. We're ticking back up. If you look at that dwell report from the Port of LA, back when it was 90,000 containers in October of last year, it went all the way down. It cut down by half, by 50% by the end of the year, beginning of this year. However, what you've seen consistently since January is it's been upticking. And what we're seeing right now is the slowdown in just getting those containers out of the terminal into the distribution centers and warehouses. And it's being magnified right now because rail has slowed down so much. They just cannot get the rail cars they need. They're waiting on rail cars, literally waiting on trains and rail cars to come into the yard to be able to load them and get them out. But with distribution centers packed to the gills, trying to get that inventory out, there's nowhere for it to go. And the default setting here is to leave the containers in the ocean terminals.
Yeah, you can see it in the data at the different rail yards. You can see there's a definite change. The total outbound containers coming out of the rail yards inland is dropping. And I mean, because that includes the full and empty rail. So there's no empties coming back out, or there's fewer empties coming back out, which is then you're not getting the rail cars back to the ports to be able to make that switch that's out there. It's really so what I mean, now we've got a strike possible, or is this make that like no way that we can let that happen ever?
Well, I mean, you're in the worst situation for a lockdown, right, a strike that you can imagine, because we're not just talking about West Coast ports. Now we're talking about rail. You're also talking about it right now over in Europe. And, Northern Europe, particularly Germany, is in the midst of this. You're talking about a trucker potential strike in the UK. And remember, one of the things that we've seen is because of the congestion at LA and Long Beach last year, containers are moving a different way. They're not all coming into LA and Long Beach. Shippers have gotten smart, and they realized, listen, I'm going to go different routes. And one of those routes they're using is the east to west route. They're going from Asia to Europe on those big ultra large container vessels, think Ever Given and 20 to 24,000 box vessels. They're going into those big yards in Europe, the big transfer yards, including yards like Felixstowe in the UK and in Bremerhaven and Hamburg in Germany, and then being loaded onto ships heading to the United States. So if you have a disruption in Germany, if you have a disruption in the UK, if you have a disruption in the United States, this is just going to be a magnification of what we've been seeing the entire time. And it's, I keep going back to this issue. It doesn't matter if you have a strike. It's the threat of that. It is everyone is hedging their their bet that they don't want to get their cargo jammed up into a port where there's going to be a strike. So you're going to start diverting your cargo along different routes. And that's why we're seeing the congestion off of ports like Savannah, New York, New Jersey, and Houston right now.
So is it me, or is it just we haven't seen this type of disorder like forever? I've been in this business for almost 35, well, yeah, just over 35 years now, and it just seems like since 2019, it's just getting crazier and crazier and crazier, and things are unraveling more and more and more on top of each other. Is it because all of this? You got the ILW, you got the railroad cooling off period, you got AB5, you got all this stuff. Is it because, again, COVID condensed all this stuff because we said, you know what, we're not going to negotiate now. Let's just get through this stuff and then we'll deal with it. We kick the can down the road, and now all this craziness is happening, strike threats, et cetera, around the world.
I was going to say, but I would have thought it would have gotten better too.
Yeah.
No, and I would argue, again, go back to that talk that General Lyons had with Gene Soroka yesterday, and the general was right on topic with COVID has been the issue that has been the primer for this. I mean, you had a system that had issues. We all know there were plenty of issues. There were freight issues long before COVID ever hit.
Absolutely.
But what COVID did is something that we hadn't seen before. It created a global problem. We've had hurricanes, we've had local issues happen, and we adjust. The problem was you put a strain on the system globally due to COVID. And not only that, remember, you changed the buying patterns of everybody. And not everybody knew how long COVID was going to last. I'm a historian. Now we have hindsight. We know how long COVID was going to last. You can go back to July of 2020 and see people are sitting there going, oh, this will be over by August, and everything will be returned back to normal. Nobody knew that. And now all of a sudden you keep having these issues so that each time we think things are getting better, we have another event that kind of hits. And the problem is when the system is under such a strain, it's very hard to reset back to quote unquote a normal level. And now the potential of strikes, the potential of disruptions, you add increased fuel costs, you add the war in the Black Sea, and now we're just seeing issues that keep magnifying, which makes it very unpredictable in the market, and that causes uncertainty, that causes increased freight rates, that causes inflation.
It almost feels like we're in this point in history where, once we're gone, and 60, 70 years are going to be like, how did it come that this is contract season every 5 years across the entire globe? And they're going to point back and go, COVID did it. Everything's shrunk into one thing, right? It's going to be like this historical thing. There's going to be a Sal Mercogliano teaching why all this is occurring now in the year 3000 instead of, or 2100, 2122, I guess is what it is. But things are absolutely crazy. So is the East Coast learning any lessons here? Are they going through their contract? Is there pickup and talking about that? Because their contracts are coming up next, right? The East Coast ports?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you have a different union. You're talking about the ILA, but you're also dealing with different situations in different ports. So Savannah, perfect example. We've had issues with the opening of the Leatherman terminal down there, and issues between the ILA and non-union workers down there. Yeah, you got to imagine that one of the things that they did back in 2014-15 when they punted this 6 years down the road is realize, this is not a good idea. We need to do this. I did have like an issue in that discussion yesterday where the general talked about the fact, well, we expected this contract not to be renewed by July 1st. I was like, I don't think so. I think everyone expected this contract to be signed by July 1st. It's just COVID has now put labor in a position where they're in a better driving seat. You have a much different situation on the East and Gulf Coast than you do on the West Coast. I mean, you have the Pacific Maritime Association, which are all the big shipping entities, really control everything on those West Coast ports. You don't have that same situation on the East Coast. Plus, you're dealing with multiple states, multiple municipalities, multiple ports, and there's competition between those ports. There's a lot of fight between, Savannah and New York, New Jersey talk very nice to each other, but behind the scenes, they love to stab each other in the back and get more freight from each other. And so there's a lot more competition there, and they're much more cognizant of the fact that they're making more money now than ever before. And you go to those reports you're seeing by Greg Miller and everybody else at FreightWaves of how many containers are coming into the ports right now, and we're talking about record levels.
Yeah, we certainly are. So the longer this goes, where's the money go? I mean, where's the money in Vegas go? The longer the cooling off, the longer the negotiations go. Who's got the upper hand?
Well, I mean, the issue you have is, we've talked about this before. The PMA is awash in money. The carriers are, making record profits. But at the same time, you're at a really an inflection point here in global shipping. You had two congressmen from California just introduce a bill called the Clean Shipping Act of 2022 that's calling for zero emissions from vessels by 2040. I mean, no emissions from any ocean going vessels by 2040. The International Maritime Organization is calling for a 50% reduction. This is based on 2008 levels by 2050. And these type of issues are going to drive shippers crazy because ocean carriers are very concerned about what's the next generation of vessel going to look like? What's the next type of propulsion? And if you're pushing ECG on them right now, they're going to have to invest that money in new technologies. And so what profits are going into the shipping firms are going to have to go into technology to figure out what kind of propulsion are we going to use to be able to get into ports. And I think that's where you're going to see a lot of money being spent. But at the same time, the labor unions are going to make the argument, especially on the West Coast, we haven't seen a pay raise in 6 years, and you're making windfall profits right now.
Yeah.
Where are we going to see a share of that?
Yeah, exactly. Excellent stuff. Thank you so much, Sal. Go Humps, and we'll talk to you again very, very soon, my friend. Take care and have a great weekend.
I appreciate it. Going to whip up some rice down in my pressure cooker right now.
Right on, brother. Well, the pressure cookie thingamajiggy, I think, is what it officially is called. But anyways.
I think you're right. That's what I would call it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So right now, let's welcome Sydney Edwards. Let's do the headlines, yeah?
I'm hearing it. We have a full report of headlines to get into and got a lot to talk about, so let's get into it.